David Scott and Ron Dean, two Australians, two of the millions of people who died in the killing fields of Cambodia. Back in 1978, they set out on a sailing adventure that would end in one of the world's most notorious jails. Victims of a monster called Comrade Duch. Like so many casualties of war, their story was largely forgotten, filed away in a too hard basket. But there was one man, an Australian prosecutor, who refused to forget. And now, after 30 years, finally, there's justice. This month, an international tribunal delivers its verdict on the terrible crimes of Comrade Duch. This is the Cambodia that tourists come to see. The magnificent Hindu and Buddhist temples of Angkor Wat. The ruins here date back to the 8th century. And it's hard to believe that in this serene place, a murderous dictator, Pol Pot, slaughtered almost 2 million of his own people in less than 4 years. In the last days of his rule, 2 young Australians were captured, tortured and murdered. And 30 years later, their killer is about to be sentenced. Amidst the chaos and mass killing of Pol Pot's Cambodia in the 1970s, the tragic story of Australians David Scott and Ron Dean has been a forgotten footnote in history, until now.
Scott and Dean couldn't have been in a worse place at the worst time, could they?
Absolutely not, and it would have been their worst nightmare. At the beginning, they probably thought that they would give their information and be released. But I think over time, as they heard the screams of torture, which would have been coming from around them, I think they will realise that their fate would have been met.
Bill Smith is a former cop from Adelaide who's finally got the massive task of prosecuting those responsible for the killing fields of Cambodia.
Good morning, Your Honours.
With Pol Pot long dead, his first target in the war crimes trial is Comrade Duch, the man who ordered the deaths of the 2 Australians and many, many more people. A former maths teacher turned mass killer.
I couldn't think of a more obsessive person or a more obsessive criminal that I've ever come across.
What do you mean by obsessive?
He could run any big business today, but unfortunately, the business he was running was torturing and killing.
The dreadful era of communist leader Pol Pot began when his Khmer Rouge soldiers rounded up the entire population and emptied the capital, Phnom Penh, banishing everyone to labour camps in the countryside.
They just emptied the city in 2 days. More than 2 million people streaming out of the city, being pushed, herded like cattle.
Does it seem like 30 years ago?
No, because I can see it. Yeah, it's very vivid with me, yeah.
New York Times journalist Sidney Schanberg was one of the only Westerners to escape Cambodia alive. His story was told in the feature film The Killing Fields.
Just a minute, he's with me! Just a minute, he's a journalist and he's with me!
He watched the beginnings of a genocide. As Pol Pot set about creating a pure peasant society. Modern technology was rejected, money burned, and the calendar reset at year 0. Any imagined enemy was eliminated.
Now, who did they single out?
Well, they singled out anybody who had worked for the other side, anybody who worked for an American, anybody who worked for the government. Anybody who wore glasses was somebody that was believed to be in the bourgeois class. Anybody who had an education. Anybody who spoke another language.
So, anybody with a few brains?
Yeah.
The outside world was unaware of the scale of the killing. And so it was that David Scott from outback Western Australia and Ron Dean from Port Kembla stumbled into the killing fields while on a sailing holiday. The two Aussies were sailing along the coast here on their way to Thailand. And out in these waters, they would have had really no idea as to the scale of the genocide that was unfolding on the mainland. But at 1 a.m. in the morning, the horror came to them. A Khmer Rouge patrol boat intercepted their yacht, and at gunpoint, they were taken straight to the capital, Phnom Penh, and into the living hell that was the S21 prison.
They were blindfolded and handcuffed. And when they arrived at the high school, they didn't know where they were.
S21 was where Comrade Duch ran a brutally efficient bureaucracy of death.
They were registered, photographed, basic biographical details taken. They would hear the screams of the tortures happening in a cell block down the road. Other detainees were used as medical experimentation, and they were operated on alive. This is not a science fiction movie. This is S21, and it was the most horrific facility and treatment of human beings that I've ever seen.
Chum Mai saw it firsthand. As one of a handful of survivors of S21, he told us what he and every prisoner, including the Australians, were forced to endure.
So this is where they dragged you? By the ear, in here?
Yeah.
Every morning, he was ordered to lie on the floor, where they unshackled his leg and arm irons.
Right here, there was a table with a typewriter on it. On the right, there were electricity cables, and on the left, there were whips.
They forced prisoners to confess, in writing, they were CIA spies. Chum begged for mercy, but they applied electric shocks, ripped out his nails, and whipped him for 12 days and nights.
The electric shocks made me pass out twice. So they poured water on me and did it again. They kept asking me when did I join the CIA. And I kept saying, I'm not in the CIA.
So you're sleeping here, and the Australian was sleeping at number 8. Another survivor of S21, an artist, Bo Meng, was interned at the same time as Scott and Dean.
And how long did you see him sleeping over there?
Between interrogations, the prisoners slept crammed into a classroom, and Bo Meng recalls one Western man in the same room.
So, Bo Meng, what did the Australian look like?
He described a tall, skinny man with reddish-brown hair, most likely Dave Scott. Dave was in a hell beyond imagining. Before embarking on his sailing holiday, he'd worked as a roadie for a well-known Perth rock band called Bakery.
We were a rock band, you know. While Dave was being tortured, I was either doing Cold Chisel's first album or Midnight Oil's first or second album. You know, just as a human being, you cannot imagine, and perhaps you shouldn't imagine, what it is that they went through.
One of Australian music's most talented guitarists, Peter Walker, spent years trying to find out what they did go through. One clue is their written confessions. To avoid torture and postpone certain death, prisoners concocted elaborate stories of being CIA spies. But even in their darkest hours, Dave and Ron's larrikin streak shone through.
There's a fair bit of humour in that confession of Dave's, isn't there?
There is. You know, apparently he was trained by Mr. Magoo. One of the leading CIA operators or operatives that he dealt with was John Hopkins, who was actually the band's manager. The web that he spins shows a man who, to us, was a roadie in the band and a guy with long hair. But inside was a very solid Aussie, of which I'm very proud to have known him.
Remarkably, Dave's tormentor, Comrade Duch, freely admits all this took place.
But you did nothing to stop those killings throughout the 3-year period.
Your question is very clear. Yes, I did not stop it.
Duch's guilt is proved beyond doubt by the meticulous records he kept. And, most incriminating of all, the photographs of everyone he had killed.
But look at this. How can this be a CIA? You know?
Just a child. These are all children.
All children. At one document showing that they killed 168 children in one morning. 168 in one morning, they killed all of them.
At S21?
Yes.
Yuk Chang helped compile evidence for the court.
Why would you kill a child anyway?
Well, the Khmer Rouge have this kind of belief. If the father found guilty or regarded as an enemy, then the wife, the children, the grandparent, the cousin, the French also are related, and therefore they're not clean. They are all bad element.
What possible threat could a child be?
Purity, you know, to have a pure society, you don't want anyone associated with the enemy.
At that time, my intention was to do the revolution to liberate the country, but...
Comrade Duch was pure evil. The way he dispatched thousands to the killing fields is compared with Hitler. And, like the Nazis, he pleaded the Nuremberg defence, that he was simply following orders.
With my respect, Mr. President.
But Bill Smith demolished that excuse.
And the more he talked, it was very hard for him to keep covering the lie, because he had so much autonomy within S21 that he was able to order the killing without his senior leaders even knowing about it.
Regarding the Westerners...
Finally, towards the end of his trial, came answers about the fate of 12 Westerners who died at S21, including Dave Scott and Ron Dean. In this chilling, matter-of-fact terminology, Duch described how he had them smashed.
After that, they had to be smashed. That is, they had to be beaten to death and their bodies had to be burned to ashes. And that was the intention of the standing committee, not to leave any dead bodies or trace of those Westerners.
More than likely, they were burnt at a location a few blocks down from S21 where they were set alight. Duch says they were killed before they were set alight. Another witness has said that that wasn't the case in relation to one of them.
Dave and Ron were two among the millions who died under the Khmer Rouge tyranny. And now the war crimes trial is helping the nation to cleanse the soil of its devils once and for all. Bill Smith has 4 more war criminals to prosecute. But first, he wants Comrade Duch sentenced to 40 years jail, to rot there for the rest of his life.
If Duch gets 40 years, he'll obviously die in prison. Are you happy with that?
I'm happy with that. I mean, the crimes at S21 were so great and so grave, unless society says you cannot do that and you must be punished severely for it, it'll happen again and again and again.